The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame. Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games that respect your time. I am Reagan Kelly, and I am joined by my very cool co-hosts.
Laura Nash.
And Shane Kelly, your twin brother.
Yes, it came up on the Discord recently that some of our new listeners weren't aware that we are identical twins, which I don't know why that would be important.
Reagan, just to clarify, Shane and Rig.
Exactly, that's true. Yes, which I don't know why that would be important context for folks, but maybe if you're trying to visualize people clustered around their microphones, maybe it helps for you to realize that two of them look similar. But
I'm just obsessed with the idea that someone out there was listening to this and imagining what the two of us looked like, and we looked very different from one another.
I wonder what those people look like. I'm very curious. Yeah. Well, I'll go ahead and get into it. This week we are talking more about Kentucky Route Zero. So we did a previous episode a few weeks back covering specifically Kentucky Route Zero's Acts 1 and 2. And Kentucky Route Zero is really, really interesting in a lot of ways, and I wanted to make sure that we cover the remainder of Kentucky Route Zero, and so we're doing that over the course of 2 more episodes today and another one upcoming. So this week we are talking about the interludes, limits and demonstrations, and the entertainment, as well as Kentucky Route Zero Acts 3 and 4, and then we're leaving for a future episode Kentucky Route Zero Act 5, and the additional interlude, the name of which I am forgetting. Was it Here and There Along the Echo was the other one?
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes. So
with the phone.
We're leaving that one for another day. And is there another interlude that I'm forgetting? I don't know off the top of my head. Doesn't matter. We're leaving everything except those things I just mentioned for a future episode. So obviously, because we are talking about the middle of the game, this is spoiler territory. So if you didn't listen to our previous episode, I'd probably go check that one out first. But we are also going to be talking a lot about themes of the game and things like that have become more clear and more interesting since the first 2 acts. So if you have played Acts 3 and 4 of Kentucky Route Zero, welcome. We're going to be talking all about those. If you haven't played, I would say that our first episode, we have a clear spoiler break where you can listen up to that spoiler break and decide when you want to hop off and go play the game. But in this case, there's not really going to be a spoiler break. You can consider pretty much all of this spoiler territory. I will have chapters about which parts we're looking at. So if you have played, for example, Act 3 but not Act 4, it'll be clear where you might potentially want to hop off if you're worried about spoilers.
Yeah, it'd be really tough to talk about the themes of this without discussing specifics. Yeah. We would just be speaking nonsense. So we appreciate it.
We would just be giving semi-political diatribes.
Yeah, just go back to listen to the first episode if you're curious what Kentucky Route Zero is about. We're not going to go into it too much here.
Okay. So all that said, let's get into it. Playing what we're talking about today is like where this game got really, really interesting for me. And I think the thing that really started to crystallize things for me was playing the interludes. So last time we talked about this game, it was before the release of Act 5, before the quote-unquote TV edition update had come out. And so if you were playing Kentucky Route Zero at any point before Act 5 came out, the interludes were separate from the main game download. They were something that you actually had to go out and download from the game developer's website, which meant I think that a lot of people weren't playing them, and I didn't. I wasn't playing the interludes. I figured I would go and check them out later after I had checked things out. But because they're now bundled into the main game, and it's very obvious where it's intended for you to play them in sequence in between each act, they've become much more, I think, of a core part of this game. And I'm really, really glad I played them. So the 2 that we're talking about today are Limits and Demonstrations, which comes between Act 1 and 2, and the Entertainment, which comes between Act 2 and Act 3.
And before we get into what those are, let me just give a shout out to the beautiful interface to choose what you want to play next. If you quit the game and you restart, there's this kind of clock style dial, but the inside is a bobby pin that you rotate to choose what you want to play. And it is just one of those little touches of surrealism that this game is so good at.
It's like a cross between like someone, like the detritus on someone's desk and a spirit board.
Absolutely. It's like a domestic Ouija. I love it.
So let's talk first about Limits and Demonstrations. The very first interlude came between Acts 1 and 2. So Limits and Demonstrations takes the form of an art exhibition, which all of these interludes kind of take a spin at trying a different mode of play or a kind of a different way of doing things than the main game. Limits and Demonstrations still sort of plays like a point and click, but rather than being a point and click where we are kind of progressing scene to scene, you're essentially you play a group of friends exploring a museum exhibition retrospective of Lula Chamberlain's artwork. So if you remember from last episode, Lula Chamberlain is the person who works at the Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces, and in her non-workaday life, she is an installation artist.
Let me tell you, I had been to the MoMA the day before I played this, did not know this was going to be, that's the Museum of Modern Art, New York, and did not know this was going to be a museum exhibition. And I was like, oh no, I'm back there. Let me tell you, Lula's work is a lot weirder and more interactive than anything I saw at MoMA. No offense to one of the best museums in the world, but it's very strange to walk around a museum and see it so accurately, I don't want to say parodied in a video game, but they get the feel of a very neutral space of a museum that doesn't really want to say what the art is about. They get that exactly right.
Yeah. I really liked this, although I will say that of the various different interludes that I've played so far, I feel like this one was in some ways the most involved in the specifics of the game, and also in some ways the least illustrative of themes. So like, yes, we get this like picture into like who is Lula Chamberlain and what is her art like? You know, she's referred to as an artist, but like, what does she do? Well, these very interesting installations, which, depending on the order you go through them, seem to sort of escalate in terms of how improbable or difficult to actually construct they become. So there's a couple of we don't need to talk about all of the art pieces here, but there's a couple that I think are pretty interesting. The one that I think is the most important in terms of the content of the game is an art piece that's called Overdubbed Namjoon Pak Installation in the Style of Edward Packer. Years 1965, 1973, 1980. This is the sort of card that you get in a very museum style. It tells you that it is made from magnetic tape, handheld tape playback head, speaker system, voice of the artist, computer synthesized speech. So the characters are approaching a large kind of, I don't know, wall or board with speakers wired up to it that has a bunch of magnetic tape, like you'd have from a reel-to-reel tape recorder or maybe like an unspooled cassette. And it's sort of held up in a kind of a weird grid or sort of bundle looking arrangement in more or less random order. And you can sort of run a tape head across those, that you're not actually doing this, but the characters are running a tape head across those strips of tape to play back recordings. And the recordings are of Lula and some other people in her life whose roles aren't really clear at this time, exploring the Mammoth Cave. Or preparing to explore the Mammoth Cave, and also some events after they explored the Mammoth Cave. It kind of gives us a out-of-sequence picture of Lula's involvement in the cave itself, and it's a way of weirdly sort of out-of-sequence exploring some events that get also referred back to in Acts, I think 3.
Yeah, the return again and again, we brought up in the last episode of like the importance of the Mammoth Cave by way of the Colossal Cave Adventure, classic adventure game, or I guess, or original adventure game, keeps coming up in this, and it will continue to do so.
I think something I really liked about this piece, this installation collection, is I think the pieces will make sense over time. This particular piece comes up word for word later. It's an Easter egg laying the groundwork. I don't know if the other ones will also echo back, but it seemed like the more you learn about Lula, the more that you're going to like this exhibition, the more things will make sense, or like you'll see why she made a piece based on her life. It definitely feels almost like a alternate reality game for Kentucky Route Zero, where it's like those things you did in science class where they made you do like a gallery of simple machines. Like it feels kind of like that, where it's not exactly moving the plot forward, but it's echoing it really closely.
Yeah, it's I'm not actually sure how any of the other artworks relate to the specifics of the game. They might just sort of be, larger portions of this envisioned artist's envisioned art career, and they're there to sort of give us a vibe or to be art pieces that are part of the context of the game, which is totally valid and interesting. I think probably the most interesting looking one is Visage. Visage is a kind of a face-like storm of spinning ribbons or something like that. Hard to really. It's sort of a weird little mini tornado.
Yeah, it's like that Photoshop effect where someone has like a mummy strand of ribbon wrapped around their head and the rest of their head is gone. I don't know if that's a common image, but I've seen it a lot in Photoshop effects.
Yeah, I've seen that too. It's definitely a cool looking piece, and I like that the obviously this is a installation artwork that would be impossible in the real world, but in video games, of course, that's fine. It's fine to have things that are impossible in the real world. The thing that I think is really interesting about it is that the like artwork card, the sign says Visage 1984 unknown media, which is like, when is the last time you've been in an art exhibition and looked at a work and it says, we don't know what this thing is made of?
That made me so happy. And of course, the first thing you can ask when you click on it is, what do you think it's made of?
Yeah. Rather than just being an art exhibition that you can walk around, you're walking around it with a group of people and they all have their own comments about it. I don't know if there's much to like call out specifically about their thoughts, but yeah, they have different conversations about the art pieces, and you can kind of decide where those conversations go. So, they wonder about what the piece means or what it's made of. The conversations are also totally branching. So if it's not like a menu of everyone has their say about each art piece. What you say about the art piece, what you choose to say about the art piece guides these conversations, and you get slightly different versions of them depending on what you choose. So it's an interesting way to explore art in the context of a video game that I don't think I've ever seen before. I don't know if I've ever really seen just like, here's a museum space to explore. I mean, I guess there's things like Namco Museum, but I don't know, not in this kind of context. Pretty cool.
Yeah, the only game I've seen that feels like this is there's a VR game that's the gallery of stolen or destroyed art. You basically walk around and see pieces that you can't see anymore because they've been stolen or destroyed.
Oh, that's a really cool idea. I've never seen that.
Yeah, it came out I don't know. It's hard with Kentucky Route Zero to talk about time because the episodes came out so far apart that I have no idea if those were contemporary ideas or if one came years before the other. But it's an interesting idea, going through galleries. Did you guys know there is technically a first interlude, but you have to do a couple things in the first to see it?
No, what are you talking about?
Carrington, the director.
Yes, okay.
If you talk to him in the first act a couple times, you can unlock a first interlude, Death of the Hired Man.
Very interesting. I want to talk about this for a second because this is important to me. The game has a totally missable character in the first act that I totally missed, and I'm pretty solidly of the opinion that is okay. The way this game is constructed, each individual person's playthrough is going to be different, but the director Carrington is a character that, depending on how much exploration you do of the map in the first game, you might completely miss him. He's referred to. So, for example, when we talk about The Entertainment is a play based on two plays written by Carrington. But Carrington is a totally missable character, and I completely missed him in my playthrough. And that's a lot to miss because he's apparently has a lot of potential dialogue that you can engage in.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I missed him too. How do you track him down?
So he shows up. I got lost when I first played the game, and I ended up back at Equus Oils, and he was there talking with the old man who owns it. And he was like, "Yeah, I want to put on the show. I don't have a venue."
Can you talk about what he looks like?
I don't remember what he looks like, because what I didn't realize is you have to keep re-engaging with him for him to keep showing up. Because I saw him in Acts 1 and 2, and then I did not see him in 3. And apparently because I didn't find him in 3, he will not be in the rest of my game unless I replay 3. So he's not just a character that you have to opt in the first time. You have to continuously opt in. And he's looking for a space to do his show. And you can keep suggesting spots, and wherever you suggest, he'll show up there in the next episode, and then you can talk to him. So apparently, since I didn't go to the location where he is, like, he'll be out of the rest of the game, but I was able to unlock an interlude with him where he talks about the poem his play is based on.
That's interesting.
It's just really interesting that we are going to have very different playthroughs, not just the normal, like, choose your own adventure interactive fiction style where we pick different dialogue choices, but I didn't realize how much you can, quote, miss in this game.
Yeah. So I mentioned his appearance just because I have not seen him in my own game, but I looked him up, and he appears to have antlers. I'm not sure if they're attached to his
he has
head
antlers
or...
on his head.
Yeah.
I was like, he had something on his head, but I didn't remember what it was. Yeah, he's got these antlers. It's not on his head. It's as if he's got a bunch of antlers strapped to his back, like as if they're upside down, almost like a carapace, like a beetle, but it's antlers. So he doesn't necessarily have them on top of his head. He has them kind of surrounding his body.
So I found a thing on the Kentucky Route Zero website that is, I've never heard of these, but there's apparently a thing called a wrongle. I don't know what that means, but basically it's like a 3D model you can view in your web browser. And in any case, there is this wrongle of Carrington available on the Kentucky Route Zero website, which is him going into a phone booth, and he has taken the antlers off in order to fit into the phone booth. So I believe they are worn, not part of his body.
Yeah, they're as if they're strapped to his back. And I do remember, now that you mention it, he's also got this like orange cravat that I thought was very striking. He looks kind of like a bust you'd see in like of a theater director, except for the antlers.
Yeah. So super interesting that this character that honestly it feels like an important part of the game is completely optional, completely missable. And it makes me wonder about other things about this game that might be so, so anyway, that if you're wondering why we didn't talk about him in Act 1 and 2, that's why. And we probably also won't be saying a whole lot about him further because, like Laura said, he may not be in her Act 3 or 4.
Right. And the thing, I didn't talk about Carrington because basically he was just a guy who wandered in and was like, where should I put on my play? Didn't seem important at the time. And I assumed everyone else had seen it. So I think that this game is going to, we talked about a couple other things, like the people with the boat. Like there's lots of things that this game might just slip out.
Yeah.
And you never see it. The plane, like who knows if that's going to come back around.
Yeah. So let's talk about the other interlude. This would be the entertainment, which happens between Acts 2 and 3. So just before the acts that we're going to be really getting into the details of today. And for me, this is where the game, the whole thing, Kentucky Route Zero, really started to make sense to me on a level. Obviously, it's still magical realist, and so making sense, isn't exactly what it does best. But it does have some strong themes. Shane, when we were talking about the game in our last episode, you, I think, very correctly said that the game kind of follows the theme of rural American poverty. But it was around playing the entertainment that it started to open up to me that, like, it's not just specifically about poverty or rural poverty or anything like that. The game, we'll talk about like what the entertainment is, but like this is really where it started cementing for me that this is a game about the effects on people of like pervasive capitalism. Like capitalism in and how it touches every part of our lives, and the nominal good that it can do, the really true harm that it sometimes does, the ways that capitalism just absolutely touches everything. And the entertainment is, so structurally, one of, I think, the most interesting interludes. It's done in the form of a play. So rather than being a point and click adventure, I wasn't expecting this, because, limits and demonstrations from a gameplay and structure perspective, it's a little bit different content, but it plays just like the main game, Kentucky Route Zero, whereas the entertainment plays completely differently. You are both an observer of and a participant in a stage play, a one act. So I thought, as soon as I got into it, I was like, oh man, Laura's going to love this.
Yes.
So Laura, can you kind of explain the play and like how it works?
So it is a play in the style of a John Patrick Shanley play for all three of you. It is basically people at a bar. And they say in the play that they've mashed together two different barfly scenes into one play.
Yeah, both by Carrington, by the way. Right?
Both by Carrington. Yeah. And in the play, both by Doolittle.
Oh, sorry, that's right. Doolittle, and is Carrington
Carrington, I don't know if he's the director of this play or if he's just looking for...
I thought Carrington was related to the entertainment, and maybe I'm just conflating.
There might be two theater directors running around.
I'm going to look it up here.
But Doolittle wrote this because it's really interesting, because he's the tour guide at Hard Times.
Yeah, I was completely wrong about this. For some reason, I was thinking that Carrington didn't come up in my game, so maybe I just didn't like cross-reference this properly in my head. But I was thinking that Carrington
directed.
Yeah, maybe he did. It doesn't say on the page that I'm just Googling through, and I don't recall specifically. I do know that Lula Chamberlain was the set designer for the performance, which is interesting.
Maybe Carrington directed in my game because I had Carrington. I don't remember.
I'm pretty sure that name came up, but I guess I can't say for certain. But yeah, go on.
But anyway, there are interesting connections back. The writer shows up as in the Hard Times Distillery. Lula Chamberlain did the set. But the play is about this bartender. He's just come back from vacation. He's got all these desperate people who are drinking and not paying their bar tabs. And he keeps saying that this reckoning is going to come. There's a woman who won't pay her parents' bar tab anymore. There's a woman who thinks her husband, a hammer salesman, might be cheating on her. And she wants him to cheat on her so she can be free of him. And they keep talking about like this burden of debt, different kinds of debt, new debt and being invented. And he keeps saying like, there's going to have to be a reckoning. Like, you guys are going to have to pay your bill at some point. And the big spoiler for this is at the end, he says, I've been only pouring Hard Times whiskey. Your debt is to them. They're going to come and collect. And it ends with a scary light skeleton man showing up at the end.
Yeah.
So there is a big reckoning.
The boys from Hard Times. So yeah. Which is, something that's a bit of a foreshadowing or preview of what we're going to be seeing later on. But it is
super surprising if you haven't played part 3 yet.
Yeah, the skeleton at the end is a really terrifying image and really good sound design, crackling like a broken neon sign. What I think is really interesting about this is, like, first of all, as a play, it's actually pretty functional. In fact, this has been produced as an actual stage play. You can buy this script as a script. It works as a play. What the game side of this does is it makes you a participant in the play, because this is a mashing together of a play called A Reckoning. That's the play that you're essentially observing. But at the same time, you are performing a pantomime play called A Barfly. So the idea is that, if you the pantomime is basically a pantomime of a drunkard sitting at a bar table trying to decide whether or not to leave. And so if you look down at the table in front of you, you have a sandwich with a brick in the middle and like a drink and like a newspaper that you can look at. And if you're looking down at your table, you're seeing in your field of view your stage directions. And your stage directions are things like the barfly almost falls out of his chair, that sort of thing. The barfly thinks about leaving but doesn't. You're basically seeing all of these stage directions explaining like that you are an actor within this space, and you're basically playing a drunk who's kind of observing the scene around him to some degree.
You can play this whole thing without realizing you're the barfly.
Yes, but if you look around, there's all sorts of interesting stuff to look around at. So if you're looking straight ahead, you're seeing the scene, right? And the scene will, unlike a lot of the dialogue elsewhere in the game, you don't have to click through the dialogue. The scene continues to play out as long as you're looking at it. Now, as a concession to the fact that you don't want to miss large chunks of it, the dialogue stops if you're not looking, which is nice. But if you're not looking, that means you're either looking down at your table and you're seeing your own set, your own scene that you're playing out, or you look back at the audience and you can see things like reviews of the production that you're currently a part of, or like notes about the set, or notes about or you could see the audience behind you. It's really an effective way to, like, it felt like theater to me in a way that very few games have achieved. Like, this really felt like a theater production in a really interesting way, and I found it very engaging, just from the same way that I usually find myself pretty engaged by sitting in a theater and watching a play. What do you guys think about it from that perspective?
At first I was a little frustrated because when I see a play, I want it to just happen, and I thought you had to keep clicking through the dialogue. I didn't realize they had it on timers,
Yeah.
which is a really small thing. And I think I wasn't sure. It was that kind of uncertainty where I didn't know what was going. But once I got into it and I realized this was less about the interaction and more about like it happening to you. Mm-hmm. It felt more aligned to the theme of like things are happening and you have no control over it than any of the other pieces of the game. This is the one piece in the game where like you can just sit and the whole game will happen around you, and it's about the loss of control. So I came back around. Beginning, I was not feeling it at all. By the end, I was like, oh no, this makes complete sense for this game.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the themes of the entertainment, because this is where I really started feeling like I had a grasp on what Kentucky Route Zero is all about to a much larger degree. And, the like Laura kind of summarized, this is about a bar that the bar itself is kind of not doing so well economically. It closed down recently. The owner said that he was on vacation and recently reopened. And after reopening, he's only pouring Hard Times whiskey. Hard Times whiskey is apparently a damn fine whiskey, but it's literally all he pours here now. And the magical realist or surrealist element that's beginning to creep into this, it actually feels a lot more grounded than a lot of Kentucky Route Zero does. It feels like a bar scene in a typical play. But where this starts getting odd is the sort of evasiveness of the owner to talk about the why he's only pouring Hard Times whiskey, where he went on his vacation, and so on. And it starts seeming kind of sinister. All the while that's building, the character I think that you're most involved with is the daughter of the two sort of real barflies, who's in, who initially she's not there, but then she kind of comes in and she's saying that she's trying to get out of town, and she's been working in a pawn shop, but recently it's converted to basically a payday lender. And the timeline of this is such that this is when payday lending was, I think this play is set sometime in the 70s or something. And payday lending is new. And she has to explain what payday lending is to the other characters. And the line she says in it that just like really stuck in my memory, because I think it's so interesting, is like, so she's explaining it. She says, so they invented a new kind of debt, right? And then she starts explaining what payday loans are. And she's trying to explain, that she doesn't feel comfortable working in this because she's seen now that, like, even more so than the sort of exploitation that was happening at the pawn shop, this new endeavor is infinitely more exploitative, and she wants out. She doesn't want to be there supporting her parents going into debt to drink themselves away any longer. And she wants to get out of her job where she feels like she's part of a system that's exploiting people. And she wants to go, I think, off to California, where, good luck finding a way to support yourself without being part of that same system there. But it really kind of shines a light on the way that this is a natural extension of this is capitalism doing what it does. It's found a new way to exploit people by
new forms of usury.
Yeah. New forms of usury is a line from the play. And to me, it's not just capitalism. It's that there's so many burdens that are individual and systemic placed on people that it's so hard to get out of it, because these are people who are alcoholics. They have financial debt. They have bad jobs. There are people who tell them that maybe eventually they'll get a promotion. All of this stuff comes up in the main game too, but it's kind of distilled in this one act, which is what one acts are supposed to do. Playwrights.
Right. And this idea that like everything has to become a financial instrument. Every aspect of your life becomes a financial instrument. And the sort of almost parody level that this goes to is that, of course, after explaining about payday lending, and how those payday loans get wrapped up into other loans and sold to larger financial organizations where people use. This is a game also. This part of the game I think came out during the financial crisis when everyone was thinking a lot about this idea of like instrumentalized debt, right? And so at the end of the game, of the play, it's revealed that not only is that happening in the payday lending space, but like literally in this bar, these drunks have built up debt to the house. The house has debt to the bar itself has debt to the distillery, and it's all part of a system where, in this case, the Hard Times Liquor Company is bundling the debt of these drunks into a financial instrument. Their debt has been sold. So now they no longer have a debt to the bar. They have a debt to the distillery, and up it goes, right? So it's this idea that like this is all one large system, and it's exploitative all the way down, right? Everybody is being exploited by somebody else in a long chain that ends somewhere at the top, and that really kind of seeing that specifically unraveled a lot for me when we got into the rest of the story, right? Because like it's all about these sort of chains of exploitation and chains of debt. Like I don't want to get into the details too much of we're going to be talking about specifics of stuff that happened in acts 3 and 4, but like it really makes a difference that like we begin act 3 with Conway getting into medical debt, right? His leg was hurt at the end of act 2. And then here we are in act 3, and he's been to a doctor, and immediately after he wakes up from the surgery that he went under at the end of act 2, here he wakes up and now his leg has been replaced by one of these glowing legs of the Hard Times Liquor Boys, right? The shocking
and they're
image.
not acknowledging this. All you see at that moment, and this is scene 1 of Act 3. Scene 1 of Act 3 is Conway sitting on the doctor's table, and they're letting him know, that it's complete, and they start to discuss payment and how his leg feels. But what you're seeing is his leg looks like it's made out of like neon. It's like flashing, almost like a warning sign on a highway.
Yeah, and if you played the end of the entertainment, it looks just like the horrifying skeleton that was one of the boys from Hard Times Liquor. So you've
which
seen
again
this
you don't
before.
know yet. Yeah.
Well, no, you have. Like if you've played the entertainment comes before Act 3.
Right, but they don't they just said there's going to be a reckoning, and then you turn around and there's the man.
Well, how would you not know that was like they definitely say at the end of the thing that like
that the hard times is coming.
That hard times is coming to collect, right? And then here is the skeleton. So like at the end of the entertainment, my thought is like, okay, this is death, right? Like this horrifying glowing uh, you know, bar sign skeleton, this flickering neon bar sign of a skeleton, is death coming to collect, right?
Right, but it's a play, so you don't know it's like a real
I didn't
thing.
actually,
we don't.
I didn't actually wind up playing the entertainment because I kind of rolled back into this and I was like, oh well, I left off on Act 2. I guess I go to Act 3. So I missed the entertainment. I think some people will do that too.
Sure. And I don't think it's absolutely necessary to play the entertainment before Act 3, but I'm glad that I did, because that bit of it essentially becomes foreshadowing. Like, okay, I know that this horrifying flickering skeleton is related to Hard Times Liquor in some way.
So Shane, since you didn't play it beforehand, what was your take on that first scene?
Well, I have to say one thing, which, obviously, if you see a skeleton, it mostly is going to represent death.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks, art history.
I did. Thanks, art history. I saw a Reddit post a couple of days ago where someone asked the question, how did people know what skeletons looked like before X-rays? And I clicked through on it and it said edit. Okay, I forgot about dead people.
Man, to be so blessed as to forget that death exists.
Yes. I love it.
Year of our Lord 2020. That is amazing.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So sorry, back on track. But yeah, I've been a little quiet this episode because I missed those interludes. I did the interlude that follows Act 3 all along the echo. But I jumped back in with Act 3 here, which, like we're saying, started off with Conway and the events at the doctor's office. And in Act 3, so what? Shoot, I'm a little lost actually. Coming back to the start of Act 3, what happened thereafter in the doctor's office when we see his skeletal leg?
So for me, the conversation was a lot about the doctor just trying to wrap up and asking questions about, do you understand your payment plan, which is to the electric company?
Right.
But yeah. I'm curious if anyone picked. There's an option. When Conway's asked, how are you feeling? He can say, that's not my leg. And that is the choice I regret not choosing. I would love to know what he says.
Yeah,
what the answer
I didn't
to
choose
that's
that
not my
either
leg
now
is.
that you mention it. I kind of wish I had now too, because there's a lot of dialogue in this that I would be interested in seeing what the alternate dialogue options are. But I think ultimately, like, that scene is mostly about this idea that, like, okay, this incident, this accident that Conway had at the end of Act 2 that damaged his leg has put him on a path that he, a path of debt. He's now in debt to the doctor. The doctor is in debt or in some sort of in economic servitude towards the drug Nerhypnol. And the power company that provides it to him, the electric company, which guess what, is related to the mine, is also related to Hard Times Liquor. It's all part of a larger system of interrelated debt. Everyone is in debt to something.
Oh, and as we're fading into this, we actually start with Conway talking to his wife. And there's this sequence where it really seems like
I think it's Lizette. She's not his wife. She's his boss.
She's his boss. Yeah. Okay.
She runs the antique store. She has a husband, but they're friendly.
But yeah, so Conway and Lizette are talking, and it's clear that she's sort of losing the track of reality a little bit. She's having like forgetfulness and things like that. And then when we come out of it. The discussion with the doctor, the doctor's basically saying, like, no, you couldn't possibly have been having a dream. You were sedated.
Right. And that conversation that we're seeing in that scene is basically, I think, when Conway is being told that that his job at the antique store is going away because the antique store is closing down.
But I think I think he knows it, but it's the last, maybe it's the last time that he's going to be able to have a conversation with Lisette where she remembers him. It very much reminded me of the opening of Firewatch. It's that like dementia is one of the scariest things to me, period, end stop. And so this is a very melancholy and, it's a two people at a table having coffee, but for me, it scared the bejesus out of me. It's very, you now realize why the antique shop is closing. It's not necessarily because it's not selling anymore. It's because Lisette is losing her mind.
Yeah, which is very sad. We don't actually see a lot about Lisette's relationship with Conway, but it's clearly like one of the most important relationships of his life.
I mean, she could be his wife. Who knows?
I think it's referenced that she has a husband, but I might be misremembering. So maybe, don't.
They're close. Yeah. They're very close.
So they wake up. Conway is back on his feet, or one of them anyway, and now they're trying to continue their search for 5 Dogwood Drive. And in order to do that, they first go back to the Museum of Dwellings, where Ezra, the kid that flew with them on the bird here, I think they were trying to return him home, and they can't get in, so Ezra continues on with them throughout the game. So Ezra is now part of our little RPG party, and they are on their way down to, I don't know where they're driving to at this point. I think they're trying to drive back to the entrance to the Zero, like to re-enter the Zero.
Yeah. They want to get back on the Zero to try and find 5 Dogwood Drive. But in order to do that,
the truck breaks down at that point, I think.
Yeah. So this is where this act really started to get interesting for me. They're starting to drive, and obviously this truck is an old one. And finally, the inevitable happens: car trouble. And so this scene was a fun one for fans of theater as well. Laura, what famous surrealist play starts with the stage direction, "A country road, a tree, evening"?
I believe that is Waiting for Godot.
Yes, it is. This is a Waiting for Godot scene.
100%.
Yeah, so
I was really worried I wasn't going to know it, Shane. I was like, he's going to do Ionesco. I haven't read Ionesco since 2003.
No, there's no magical realist slow pitch slower than this one. But yeah, so in the Samuel Beckett play, it has 2 kind of wanderers sitting by a tree, waiting for someone to come and meet them, and that's what this scene kind of turns into. Is our players are sitting there by the side of the road, and they have an amusing scene where you call for a tow truck.
Oh, I loved that dialogue. That was so funny.
It was some pretty funny dialogue, but I mean, it doesn't really serve to advance anything except kind of the ambiance and the humor, and to instill a bit of hopelessness in, I think, the player, who thinks to themselves, "Oh, am I just going to have to sit here and wait for a tow truck?"
And also, like, just how ineffectual customer service feels on either side.
Yes, in the middle of the night, they can't
do anything for you, and they feel
empty
bad.
Road. Ugh. So obviously we're waiting for the tow truck, and then we cut to a scene where we are introduced to these 2 new characters who become pretty major characters throughout the rest of the game. And fan favorite characters, Junebug and Johnny.
First and most importantly, they're riding in a motorcycle with a sidecar, which always will make me happy when I see a motorcycle with a sidecar.
The best.
Every time.
Love it. And Junebug and Johnny are riding through the night. They are discussing their music act. They are on their way to do a performance. They're very, very late. And interestingly, they are on their way to the Lower Depths, which is the same name, I believe the same bar from the entertainment. But they're on their way to do a late night performance at the Lower Depths. We didn't mention it when we were talking about the entertainment, but a big theme of recurring element of the entertainment was that the people in the bar were waiting for the entertainment to arrive. They were waiting for a musician to come and play a show at the bar, and that never comes. Also very Waiting for Godot, right? They spend the whole play waiting for something that never arrives. And here come Junebug and Johnny, and presumably they are the people that were being waited for by the characters in the play, sort of continuing to blur the lines between this fiction within fiction and then the fiction of the game.
Spoilers for Waiting for Godot. At the end of that, Godot rolls up on a motorcycle with a sidecar.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
that
sweet.
is the most expensive part of the play and why it's not produced very often.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know one ever does that show. They're really interesting. They're both musicians. So I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, because we learn some interesting things about Junebug and Johnny a little later, but like, what do we learn about them in this first scene? Because at this point, we don't know a lot about their backstory or anything like that. We just sort of hear them talking about their music act, and we know that Johnny, I think, likes pets, likes animals, is continually asking, like, oh, there's we could go back and pick that dog up and take him with us, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get
we have
animals.
a should we or shouldn't we stop scene with them, which, I always like to kind of test the interactivity in things like this. Whenever Johnny I think it was Johnny was asking Junebug to go back and stop and try and help the stranded travelers. And I just had Junebug say no over and over and over again. And eventually Johnny wears Junebug down, and you do stop and go back. Junebug turns out to be really good with machines. Wonder why that is. And
if you're really eagle-eyed or eagle-eared at this point, you'll notice that Junebug and Johnny make robot noises whenever they walk.
Yes, they do. Yeah, I did notice that, and it took me a little while to put two and two together. Yeah, they also have gray skin.
Yeah, depending on when you depending on some dialogue choices later, you do learn a little bit more about them. And I don't remember exactly when it was, so I'll just go ahead and mention that Johnny and Junebug are both robots or androids. They were built by the power company, and they decided they didn't like the job that they had been constructed to do. And so they decided to reinvent themselves. They believe the job they were constructed to do was draining the Elkhorn mine, the mine that the miners died that we discovered in Acts 2 and 1. But they decided that they weren't happy being what they were or doing what they were constructed to do. So they have reinvented and remade themselves into traveling musicians.
Before we move on, I want to grab this piece of dialogue because it's one of my favorite. So Junebug is talking to Ezra the kid, and he says he wants to be specific. And she says, you just got to make choices and own them. You think I was born this way? You think I was born this foxy? I came off the assembly line about a half foot shorter and all gray, no eyes. They were going to have us clearing out the old mine. Doesn't matter what you look like under all that rock and water. A bunch of gray shadows shoveling and hammering invisibly at the walls, draining the tunnels. And you could read this very much as a metaphor if you don't realize they're robots. I came out, all gray, and I had to make myself the way I want to. And it's pretty, I wouldn't say it's easy to miss, but there's so much poetic language that you could just think of it as like, I had to make myself into this version of myself. But it's more fun when you realize they're actually androids, and she literally did punk herself up to make herself an individual rather than a machine.
I also really like that it was her that did that transformation of herself, because in a lot of ways she's kind of a repetition of a very common literary motif, the kind of female android Pygmalion kind of scenario where in the classic version of that trope, it's the kind of theme of the perfect woman, which she seems like a perfect woman in a lot of ways, the ways that kind of image is represented. And in those tropes, the theme of the perfect woman in particular is that she's the perfect woman who could only have been created by a man, and she is kind of a self-made creature, an android, and has created herself in her own image, which is wonderful.
I want to say something I thought was really interesting. Like, I if you go back and look at the original Kickstarter video and other material about Kentucky Route Zero, first of all, it looks completely different and is a totally different thing. But there's a lot of elements of what Kentucky Route Zero would become in that. And one of the things that, Junebug is there as a character, but she was originally envisioned as essentially like a disused Chuck E. Cheese robot, like a band robot, that she was
like the animatronic mice?
But not like as a mouse, but like a person, but like a robot country music singer who was sort of trapped in the restaurant that she was built to play in or something like that, and that you would help her escape or something like that. I think it's really interesting where that character went, because like you still have this element of like, yes, she's a robot and she's reinvented herself, but we're kind of coming to her in media res, where you're not seeing that backstory. It's only sort of reference that she is this robot that has. But what's important about Junebug is what she has made herself into. Like, it's kind of beautiful when you think about this. Like, she's this nice metaphor of, or like, idea about the idea that we are who we are. Everyone is a work in progress, a product of their own creation. That, she is very explicitly a character that she decided to become, right? And I love that, because it's I don't know, it's so true about all of us, right? We are all essentially like our own creation. And I don't know, I really, really like Junebug in that way. I like when I like that about her.
It's real nice to have a character about self-invention when everyone else is being brought down by burdens, by the man and their own weaknesses. Junebug's like, I have made myself. It's kind of a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, and more than anyone else in this, she's not free of the invisible wicked hand of capitalism that's holding all of the other characters down in this piece. She's still part of that, but she's found her way to be herself anyway. And I think that's she's sort of like a little bright spot in this. In a literal way too. She almost glows compared to a lot of the other characters.
Mm-hmm. Might also be worth mentioning that the original Kickstarter version of her is clearly very visually inspired by Loretta Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they went in a different direction for her style in the final version of the game, both like stylistically and musically. But I like the idea of, like, if you've ever heard Loretta Lynn's album, like Coal Miner's Daughter, there's like a real thing going there.
Totally.
So I think you still have a little bit of that theming in there.
Yeah. So we're kind of plugging on through. I don't think we need to talk about every single beat, but I want to make sure that we're getting all of the important stuff as far as theme is concerned. Obviously, they stop and pick you up, and you go to the bar. Sort of the deal was she's going to help you repair your truck, as long as you will come and be the audience for her performance, so that it's not empty when she performs at the lower depths. And so you go and get one of the most visually arresting scenes in the game, which is the performance at lower depths. They sing this song that it's a beautiful song, but you are constantly making choices about the lyrics as she performs it in a way that I thought was really interesting. And
yeah, the song is called Too Late to Love You.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my favorite part of this act, in an act that so far has been my favorite. You get to interact with the song as it's being played by choosing the first line of every verse. But it's lyrics like, as long as you were gone, I knew that I was free from certainty that our love could ever be. It's too late to love you now. It's too late. I've made my vow. But I mean, the cool thing about this is so first off, she does a quick change, and she's suddenly in this kind of luminous blue dress, I mean, and the bar itself starts to kind of slowly float away. The ceiling and walls kind of fade out, and you're seeing the night sky with like stars and shooting stars whirling past. And the music is super good. Like, I'm glad that, I like me some Loretta Lynn, but I'm glad they went in this direction for this character. Like this is my shit musically. It's they have this brief conversation before the show starts, where she and Conway talk about like what kind of music she's going to play, and I wish I had screenshot that, but like he's like, oh yeah, whispercore, sure. And I was like, yeah, this is gonna be for
Yeah,
me.
I think I saw that and I was like, Shane?
Yeah.
So
and yeah,
really,
so this was really good. It's not a lot to say about it stylistically, except it's a song that's kind of about a singer who is being left by their lover and has returned, I think, and has but the lover has made a commitment to someone else, I think is what's going on in that song.
So this act is so interestingly paced to me.
mm-hmm. It feels like 2 or 3 acts in a way, because
Yeah, we have all this kind of like interstitial type, like wrapping up the previous section, the car breaks down, and then you have this beautiful set piece. It just feels like that in 90% of the game would have been the penultimate action or the end of the act, and then there's so much more left.
yeah, there is. In fact, looking at the clock on our episode, we may need to break Act 4 out into its own separate thing, because we may need, maybe we can just record that in a day or two here, because I think there's still enough to talk about here where we can spend a little more time on this and it'll be a whole episode.
Act 3 is really rich.
Yeah, Act 3 really, really is. So we proceed. The bartender gives us directions back to the Zero, and Johnny and Junebug are going to tag along for a little while. So the whole team heads down to Route 0, and we ultimately end up in a place called the Hall of the Mountain King, which is a great name. And I'm pretty sure is a name of a place from Colossal Cave Adventure, actually.
It is 100%. And this is the most reference-dense piece of the game. There are absolutely tons of game references here, and I really want to get into those.
Okay,
because
please
I
do.
tried to track down a few of these. Okay.
It's the piece from him.
Well, first set the scene.
Yeah.
What is in the Hall of the Mountain King?
So as you start to walk into the Hall of the Mountain King, you're going down into a cave that is lit by firelight. There's a pile of all sorts of detritus that you kind of are climbing up a ramp to get to, and it's things like you're passing a backpack, and I can't remember what all you're finding, but you're walking up this long winding path past all of these kind of random forgotten items to make your way up to this firelit pile of stuff in the center of this cave. And we forgot one thing that I absolutely loved. Can I jump back before this mammoth cave?
Go for it.
So you optionally have the option to go back to Equus Oils here.
Oh, I didn't do that. I don't think.
Yeah. So I did go back to Equus Oils here, and because there was a scene that I really liked, a really arresting image.
I feel like our lesson is always go back to Equus Oils, because that's how I met Carrington. Like, maybe you should just always stop when it's available.
Yeah, honestly, whenever you get access to the map, I think it probably doesn't hurt to just sort of try and explore it. If I had one sort of like fault to find with that, I find it a little bit frustrating to just sort of like randomly roam the map, hoping that like options to click on blink on. I kind of would have preferred not having to just sort of like roam through every road of Kentucky every single time the map opened up. And I didn't do that, and obviously missed content that I might have been interested in seeing because of it. So, but keep that in mind. If it gives you open access to the Kentucky map, there's almost always something you can go and do on it other than go towards what your next goal is.
So this, I just have to mention because it's my favorite image of this, even after the really cool imagery of the lower depths. You go back to Equus Oils and just sort of chat with some of the people that you've already met before who are there. I think the theater director is there. Mm-hmm. But like I said, I hadn't engaged with him much, so that conversation I had a hard time making sense of. And then as you leave, the highway is blocked by a whole herd of horses.
Oh, Yes. Okay. I don't remember the scene that you're referring to before that, but I remember the highway blocked by horses, which was like,
Yeah. And it's a very brief moment, but all you see is the headlights and the splash of light across the highway, and a collection of like 5 or 6 horses who are just standing super effing majestically, casting long shadows. And it is it's a real moment, and I liked it a lot. So then you do get to the Hall of the Mountain King, where you're going back down into on your way back to the Zero. You find your way to this underground cavern, and I need to make sure I have something with names here. So you meet someone named Donald and some of his assistants who are working on a project here in this underground cave. And so there's this pyre that you kind of climb up to. So again, like I said, super dense with references. The Colossal Cave Adventure, which is set in the Mammoth Caves of Kentucky, original adventure game, and it was focused a lot of it on a central location of the actual colossal cave called the Hall of the Mountain King, which itself is a reference to, I want to say, Wagner.
Probably.
I
think.
Yeah. And so you meet this guy named Donald there, who is working on something called Xanadu, which is a computer simulation of the cave system, which is significant because the guy that created the original Colossal Cave Adventure, the original adventure game, was doing so as a simulation originally of exploring the Colossal Cave. This was a guy named William Crowther, who was an amateur spelunker and visited the caves with his wife, and he decided to simulate it in the computer. So
the like cause and effect of all of this, it gets particularly like surreal and difficult to sort of follow plot beats in this section of the game because, of course, like it gets increasingly weird here. But like we're ultimately going in here to try. Our goal at the moment is still to try to find Lula, because we need her to, I guess, to find where Dogwood Drive was because of the sort of bureaucratic stuff that was happening at the end of Act 2. So we still need to find Lula in order to get information on where Dogwood Drive is. So we're trying to
because there was an address collision. There was 2 places with the name Dogwood Drive,
right,
and we had to resolve that with some kind of piece of paperwork.
Yes.
But we're climbing up here. We start meeting some of these assistants that work with Donald. I've got Roberta, Amy, and Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Andrew is, I think, Andrew Plotkin.
Oh, interesting. I didn't put that together.
Yeah, so Andrew Plotkin is the guy who created Spider and Web, and you guys were playing Hadean Lands, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What made you think he was Andrew Plotkin?
Because all of them have names from people famous to IF.
Oh, okay.
Interactive fiction, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I didn't put that together at all.
So there's Andrew Plotkin.
You're absolutely right.
There's Amy, who is also an Infocom author who wrote Plundered Hearts, which is probably famous for being the only commercial interactive romance novel.
Which I've never played. Why haven't I played that? That sounds great. I'm going to go play it.
And
Dude,
she-
it's
yeah.
going to be so your
And
shit.
she's
Why
the one
haven't you
talking
played
about romance and how she wants to get romance into the game.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the third one, I think, is Amy, who's Amy Briggs, one of the founders of Infocom.
Huh. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I said Amy. Hang on. So I talked about Amy.
Roberta?
Yeah, so Roberta is Roberta Williams, one of the creators of Sierra Online, which was, and a creator of King's Quest.
Oh, she's super famous. Yes. Okay, that makes sense too. She's hugely important in the development of point and click adventure games.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the game from Cardboard Computer in 2011, A House in California, was based on Mystery House, which was Roberta's first adventure game.
Okay. I did not put any of that together.
These were some of these things. I started to pick up on some of these references once I saw Andrew, and I started to kind of get some ideas there, and I started to try and dig for some of these answers.
I'm glad you did.
So you get you get there, you get to the top, and you're talking with Donald about Xanadu, which is his, and that is it on its face extremely IF referential.
Yes,
because it's a simulation of the colossal cave within a simulation of the colossal cave, which references simulations of the colossal cave.
It's great, and it's also
it's caves all the way down.
In the context of the game, it's running on an ancient, bizarre, mostly broken computer that operates because of black mold growing inside it, which only grows in this cave. So initially the machine is broken, and we want to have to fix it in order to use the simulation Xanadu to locate Lula, because we're told that because Lula helped create Xanadu, which apparently she did, and referring back to the tape, by the way, that we heard in the art exhibition in between Acts 1 and 2, that comes up here too. Lula helped create this during some time she spent in the colossal cave, and so we have to help.
We can't talk about Xanadu without talking about Samuel Taylor Coleridge for at least a second.
Also true. Okay.
Yes, it's the law.
Yeah. So Xanadu is the name of a very, very influential poem, which has the quote, "In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea." And that
poem is misquoted in this game several times. They kind of do their own spin on it.
Yes, I like,
which I love.
I liked the Kentucky version that they gave of the Xanadu poem, but Xanadu is, so they're referencing Xanadu, the poem, in a way here, but they're also referencing a real world project called Xanadu. So
this is the first time I've heard Xanadu referred to. That the important thing about the Xanadu poem is the cave and not the house, which I really, really enjoyed.
Interesting, yeah.
Xanadu about caves is a very interesting spin.
So, I mean, it does kind of touch back to the themes of wealth and poverty, but in the way that Xanadu usually is a reference to, like, I mean, in what's the famous film featuring
Citizen Kane?
Thank you. Yeah, in Citizen Kane, like Charles Foster Kane names his mansion Xanadu.
There we're talking about the stately pleasure dome and not the caverns measureless to man.
Yes. So Xanadu is often used as like a reference for opulence and luxury. So, a synonym for like heaven on earth. And the poem is a lot of times kind of like this metaphor for artistic expression that is interrupted or obstructed.
Yeah, the famous person from Porlock story.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, can you explain that, please?
Yes. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote Xanadu in an opium stupor, right? And he was blissed out on opium and composed the poem in his sleep or in a trance. And when he awoke, he had the poem fully in mind, and he immediately started to feverishly write it down. And then the famous story that he tells of this is that the poem is incomplete because while he was in the process of writing down the poem that he composed in his dream, he was interrupted by a visitor, a person from Porlock. Literally just a person who was coming to visit him from the town of Porlock. That's all we know about that person. And the person from Porlock interrupted him, and when he returned to writing, the dream was lost, and he could not complete the poem. So that's his reason for the poem being left unfinished. That story of it is almost more famous than the poem itself, because it's sort of
a person from Porlock is now or just a Porlock.
Yes,
is something where that shows up in everything from like Douglas Adams to like Conan Doyle as a symbol of assholes who interrupt you when you're making art.
Yeah, it's like the writer's block made flesh.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if everyone has a Porlock in their lives, the Stranger in a Strange Land, has Porlock. There's lots of.
I've got a little podcast Porlock screaming in the other room right now, and she's definitely looking forward to me being done with my podcast, so we can come play with her toys together.
Oh yeah,
Aw.
The life is full of Porlocks, but I think that specifically the Porlock in this story is as you. So you manage to get the computer working, and you start by literally getting Lamp, which is another Colossal Cave Adventure reference, and you start exploring this simulation, and the simulation turns into a simulation of the setting up of Xanadu, which continues to be interrupted by these skeletal figures, these strangers who come to scrape the mold off of the crystals in the computer every so often and interrupt your simulation and reset it. So I think those guys are the Porlocks of this story.
Yes, and it gives you it's very cool because it's like it's providing you the backstory on the computer from the computer itself. It's very, very cool. And that scene that we're setting is also basically the content of that is the scenes that we got in fragmentary versions from Lula's artwork.
So it's Lula's artwork. You're currently doing the simulation of the cave you're in now. What if I were to tell you there's a third level of meta outside of the game?
Provide it.
So I have the book from the Victoria and Albert exhibition that included Kentucky Route Zero, and they said that the first thing that the Cardboard Computer folks built outside of the initial Kickstarter prototype was the Hall of the Mountain King, because they wanted to figure out what the scale of the game is going to be. So the first build was this huge system of tunnels where the researchers were all spread out, and then you had to go from each person, and it was like you were exploring the caves and you were stumbling upon bits of poetry. You were doing this whole thing in real time, and then they scrapped it all and went to what we have now, which is you are in a relatively small, intimate space, and then you go into the computer and live what they built as the first prototype of the game.
I love that. That's really cool.
So their simulation of a simulation of a simulation is also them simulating the first thing they built for Kentucky Route Zero before they scrapped it and brought it back in Act 3.
That's really, really cool. I love that.
Boosh.
Can I add another layer of meta?
Yes, more layers.
Okay.
You're playing it on a computer. Shay, do you have further meta to introduce before we move on?
I do have a couple more layers of meta. Donald's name, it comes from Don Woods, who's the first person to rework the Colossal Cave Adventure, giving it fantasy elements.
Which is really what made it famous, because the Colossal Cave Adventure became famous by being distributed on mainframes from college to college. It was something that you couldn't at the time play on anything that you would own in your house. This had to be played on a massive computer, not unlike Xanadu here. It's a massive computer that would probably have existed at your university center, and you would dial into via Telnet. And it was essentially the first viral game because it spread from college to college, from university computer system to computer system, and so on.
And he says there's extra cycles at some point. It's very college, computer, academic.
Yes.
And apart from that, Donald is also based on Ted Nelson and his Project Xanadu.
Well, there you go.
is an early pioneer who was basically a IT pioneer who coined the term hypertext. And hypermedia, and that is a very apt project to be referenced here, because he started it at Project Xanadu in like 1960 as a way to create like a interlinked way to create, distribute, and sell hypermedia. And the Project Xanadu, he continues to work on it to this day. And in 2013, he released a fully functional version called Open Xanadu. So the project to create
I don't know anything about this.
Xanadu, the perfect hypertext environment, continues as a labor of love to this day.
That's super cool. So obviously, tons going on here, and you can spend a lot of time exploring Xanadu. But the key thing that we learn from this computer and from Xanadu itself is we learn about the strangers. We're trying to find Lula, and we learn about the strangers that have been coming into the Hall of the Mountain King and disrupting the computer. And so the next thing that we kind of do is we go looking for the strangers, and this is where the story structure.
I'm not ready to leave Xanadu yet.
Okay, fine. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I think in this conversation, we also find out that Weaver was his assistant at some point. Doing
yes,
math
important to bring up.
So once again, Weaver is back. I think you get into certain... I'm not smart enough to pick up on the mathematical references mostly in this part of the game, but there are some, I think, including Conway's name. So Conway, named after the guy who created Conway's Game of Life in the 70s, which is regarded he was a mathematician who created what's sometimes thought of as the first art game.
That's really interesting too. Well, so we have to proceed on to the place where the strangers come from, right? So that both within the simulation of the game and in the sort of rumors that are told to us by the various assistants, this computer project, this Project Xanadu, has been beset by mysterious, terrifying strangers. And they've been, disrupting the computer system by scraping the mold off of it and so on. And so we have to travel to the place where the strangers come from. And this is a really interesting moment because Conway and Shannon go talk to the strangers off screen. We don't see what happens with them. We have to wait outside in a kind of a graveyard where Ezra and Junebug and Johnny just sort of hang out waiting for Conway and Shannon to get back. And when they do, they found what they were looking for, but something has clearly changed or gone wrong. The tone is weird, right? And I really like the way that this was done because we do eventually see what happens with Conway and Shannon. But when they come back and then we then go back and actually use the Xanadu computer to locate where Lula is, the tone has changed. Something not good happened down there in the place where the strangers come from, and happened to Conway in particular. And so it leaves us really wondering what's going on. Could you guys remind me, what point do we then flash back to this? Because we don't see that scene of what happens in the place where the strangers come from, which we later learn is Hard Times Liquor, or the distillery.
Right. They just make references to...
But we do
it wasn't
see that
worth
scene.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So you can run around this graveyard and see all the, read all the stones, which I very much enjoyed. But when Conway comes back from the church, he says it wasn't worth what happened, but they figured out how to fix the computer. You go back in, you play the working version of Xanadu, not the weird, horrible sounding broken one, and you complete the game. And you get the coordinates. Lula comes back. Lula brings the coordinates. You feed it into Xanadu. You get the way back to 0, and you actually know where you're going now. Mm-hmm. And then you stop by the bureau to pick up the outcome of that data. And at the bureau, Lula answers you, and you have to wait for the ferry. So you're sitting there waiting for the ferry, and then you're asked point blank by Junebug what the hell happened,
right?
What happened in that church?
Yeah, and that's when we flash forward or back, right to the. So I want to talk a little bit about because we're getting close to the very end, and the last scene essentially is this before we flash back to the present, waiting for the ferry, is what happened to Conway and Shannon when they went to the place where the strangers come from, which, as we learn, is Hard Times Liquor, the distillery, which also, by the way, is essentially one and the same with the power company, etc. And theme-wise, what I think we're dealing with here is well, okay. Well, let's talk about the scene first, and then we'll get into that stuff. Conway and Lula get to the distillery. They meet. The people that work in the distillery are all these glowing skeletons, and they're kind of given a tour of the distillery. We talk to some various people in the distillery about their lives, and very much a lot of the dialogue there has to do with people essentially working off debts. Everyone who works there, essentially working for the distillery is both, slowly paying off a debt to the distillery in sort of indentured servitude kind of way, but also incurring new debts as you go in a way that feels very like Kafkaesque or Catch-22. The structure of life of the men or skeletons that work in this distillery is essentially like really brutal capitalist wage slavery, I guess, right?
I think it's worth mentioning that like the appearance of the distillery is, it doesn't look like a distillery. What it looks like is the kind of a cross between the lair of a James Bond villain, where you have mindless drones constantly walking around in the background, and the lobby of Enron.
Oh yeah,
I guess I could see that too. It does have it's a very corporate space. There's all sorts of dialogue that can happen here, and there's some really interesting stuff where you get like flashbacks of Conway's life that I thought were really useful.
You get to drive a little car.
Yeah, you get to drive a little car around those little like corporate like little buggies that you used to drive around inside of warehouses, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I took a tour of the Boeing plant and I was having flashbacks to
yeah, it's very much like a corporate tour, right? But as part of that corporate tour, they're essentially given a sample of the liquor, poured some really good stuff, and that was very expensive liquor. And now Conway is in debt to the distillery himself.
This is a little bit Persephone, isn't it?
And not only that, he was a recovering alcoholic, and now he's gone back into the debt of alcoholism.
Right.
Like it's a double whammy. It's so sad.
So yeah.
Conway.
I should mention there's an interesting interaction there where that kind of glitched out my computer, and I had to actually restart the game. But the second time it worked and it was cool, which is that when you're offered the drink, your cursor moves on its own to accept the drink. You can kind of drag the cursor to fight it a little bit, but not really. I thought that was an interesting interaction. There are a lot of places in this game where I think there's some bugs around their use of like creative cursor interactions that I keep running into, where the Mac OS cursor kind of fights you a little bit. I don't know if anybody else
might be a Mac thing. Yeah, and I wonder how they manage that on the Switch version, for example, where obviously there's no mouse cursor, but I definitely ran into those a little bit, but like it works for the most part.
Yeah. So if you're playing on a Mac, I mean, hopefully if you're listening to this, you've already played it. But if you are playing on a Mac, turn off the feature in Mac OS where you can like jiggle the mouse and the mouse cursor gets really huge. And that'll help you a little bit.
Okay. So I want to talk about the themes of this, like wrapping up this act. We end this act with Conway, who was almost, he was on his last delivery for his job for the antique store feels like the traditional conception of what is a job, right? It is a job that he works. He has a good relationship with his boss. He performs labor and gets money in return, and that is his job. It's his role within the economy, and it's the role of the job within his life. And then we end this. Same thing. He's ready to retire, and we end this game with him now involved in a job working for the distillery that has a completely different character, one that feels much more like the sort of all this stuff is ultra heightened, but it is the way that jobs have and working has become worse, in that he works this job not just because he can do it and wishes to do it and is paid to do it, but because he can't not do it for economic reasons that are part of a system beyond his control. And part of that is that he's being exploited in his alcoholism is being exploited. He's being economically exploited. And it all began because he got into medical debt. His medical debt is being exploited. It's all very much a part of every part of this is talking about the ways that this larger system is built to specifically find and exploit people's weaknesses, and not even just weaknesses. You don't have to be weak to be injured. You don't have to be weak to need a job to live. This is a game about like how all of the different ways that like capitalism is touching the lives of these characters.
I don't have to be weak to love delicious whiskey.
Exactly. We don't, do we? And poor Conway comes out of this. Conway has a pretty good outlook, but poor Conway comes out of this chapter, with a bizarre glowing leg and a potentially lifetime commitment to working that he didn't expect to have on the day he was planning to retire.
It's about how surprising that debt can be. I think that it's not just that, it's not like people are like, oh no, I was taken advantage of. It's that you needed surgery, you wake up from the surgery, and now you have debt. And it's not that you didn't think about the debt beforehand, it just wasn't a reality. You take a sip of whiskey and you're indebted for life. There's a lot of unforeseen consequences that are much bigger than you could have ever anticipated. And it's sneaky. It's pernicious. I think that's what's really interesting. It's not preachy either.
It's not preachy. It's just it does a really good job of sort of showing like this is how things can be sometimes. This is Conway's access to medical care was contingent upon his being useful to capital, right? Being useful to bosses, essentially.
In most games and books, this would be the role of the boogeyman. Like, this would be the role of the villain. Like,
yeah, I loved that they, that we get into the distillery and these horrifying monsters that were these skeleton men that were, creeping around in caves turn out to be just more victims of a system, right?
The author of the play is your tour guide.
Really?
The person who wrote the entertainment about death is Doolittle, the person who now works for Hard Times Liquor.
Oh man, thank you, Laura.
And it's just, again, it's that like, it's meta, and it's also that kind of insidiousness that even the person writing about poverty and debt is himself working for Hard Times now.
Yeah, because they can't not. Because it's, when you're in a system like this, like you and I and everyone we know are part of this. And, whether we're being affected by it like Conway is right now or not, your access to healthcare is contingent upon your ability to provide value for a system. When we say things like healthcare is a human right, what we mean is that healthcare, and I'm focusing on healthcare because it's in the national consciousness, but there's other aspects to this too, but like something that feels like it ought to simply be a right. Or maybe even if it doesn't feel like it ought to be a right, just think hard about why is it that you or I, if we lost our job, if we were unable to work, or maybe if we just worked a different sort of job, or whatever it is, your access to healthcare, for example, is contingent upon your continually providing value to people who have power over you simply because that they own, I'm going full communist here, but like they own the means of production, right? And because they own the means of production, you serve them in order to live, and in order to live in the most basic way of not dying when you get sick.
I think it's important to note that Kentucky Route Zero deals with themes that are inherently political, but it doesn't take a side. Right. No one is saying we need change in this specific way. They are just telling their stories or living their stories and saying it sucks to be the subject of this story. So if you're allergic to politics and games and you somehow got this far into Kentucky Route Zero, it's not
good luck with the rest of it.
Well, it's not taking
no, true.
It's not saying this is the change that needs to happen. It is describing the current state very well and leaving you to take your own point of view about what exactly is the problem. It's kind of just presenting this hopeless situation in as much detail and with as much surrealism and extra magical realism aspects as possible.
It is an artistic reflection of life in rural America, is what a lot of the themes of the game are going for. And in this case, more than 40% of working age Americans have some kind of trouble with medical debt in their lifetime. Yeah. So it is just an aspect of life that's being reflected here, and and we see it along with the systems that play around it.
And you feel so much for these characters over time that you will feel things. What you want to do with it is your own. It doesn't tell you how to feel, but it will make you feel.
Absolutely. I'm going to steal a line from Austin Walker over at Waypoint, where he was talking about this game, contrasting it with other games that have political messages. And he said something along the lines of that this is a game that's really concerned with not so much with what do we do, but what does it do to us? And I love that, because you're right, Laura. This is not a game that's saying anything about here's how we resolve this situation. It's just casting a weird light that clarifies in a way that just looking at the world around you might not. And it's not about look at the terrible things that could happen to this character. This game in every moment tries to find ways to tell you it's not just Conway that's suffering in here. Everyone is. You are. This is a vast system, all of it connected, and it's connected to every aspect of the lives of every character in this game. And this act of this game in particular, Act 3, combined with the entertainment, absolutely blew my mind. I liked Acts 1 and 2, but Act 3, it just completely threw me for a loop. And this decade has been one in which I have gone through a lot of changes in terms of politics and so on. And I'm also not going to try to spend a lot of time, telling you all about my personal political journey or anything like that. But I will say that games have been a surprisingly big part of that. And I think this is the game that has had the most resonant political message for me that I've played since Night in the Woods, and this probably even more so. This came before Night in the Woods, so obviously I think this influenced that.
Oh my God, I just thought of how different our Night in the Woods conversation would have been if we played this first.
Oh my God,
it's crazy.
Right? Can you believe it? I almost want to go replay that now, because this game actually did, despite the fact that it's very surreal, it actually clarified some things for me about the way that I see this sort of systemic, the way that pervasive, totally pervasive rent-seeking capitalism reaching its fingers into every single aspect of our lives, the way that actually works on people. That's what this game is about. And I thought it was actually really a little bit mind expanding. I gotta say, great stuff here. I don't know. I don't know how much else I have to say about it.
Good game is good, guys.
Good game is good, guys. And I think we should probably go ahead and wrap it up.
I don't know. I think it's too long.
Okay, maybe so. Because this game is a bit of an exception for us in that, if we took any individual,
probably
acts,
3 episodes of the short game. We have never had one game that we devoted 3 episodes.
I guess you're right, but we gotta. So next time we're gonna do another episode. That
Life is strange.
Yeah, that's true. Life is strange. And that was also episodic. So that's our out here, is that let's say that each one of these is a short game, each act. And this particular act was great. So I'm glad we took the time to really focus on it and do a full episode just on Act 3. I'm fine with it. We had a lot to say, and hoo boy. So next time we're going to come back with more of Kentucky Route Zero, probably talking about Acts 4 and 5. But I guess we'll see how that structure ends up actually working out. Looking forward to talking about that. Anybody have any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
We didn't ever say the game's fun. The game is fun.
Also true and beautiful and really a joy. We've just talked about some of the ways that this game is about dismal, exploitative, etc. But it is beautiful.
Like any book club, you take that as an inherent. We liked the game. Let's talk about the nitty gritty.
Yes, absolutely.
Just want to say, if you somehow got to the
definitely.
end without playing, like, this game is not a straight bummer.
Yes, absolutely not a bummer. I've had so much fun. I've had fun playing it, and I look back on it. I thought about this game in retrospect after playing it more than almost anything that we've ever played.
Mm-hmm. And I also will say, like, we talk a lot about games fitting into your life. This game is flexible in terms of how you engage with it. All of the chapters are open to you to start at any time. Mm-hmm. Things like the interludes are cool but truly optional. And like if you're like me and you got to like 99% of the way through Act 4 and you're like, you know what, I got to catch up for book club. I'm going to skip Act 2 and I'm going to start straight with Act 3. Like it allows you to do that. Mm-hmm. And like a good book, you can kind of skim the pages a little bit and see what you like from it. So if you want to just dip a toe into this game, I think you really can do that and see how it feels for you.
Minor criticism, this has the same issue as Netflix TV shows do, and that you don't know until you start an episode or you're in the middle of it how long that episode's going to be. You know, like when you're watching Netflix and an episode might be 35 minutes or it might be an hour 20 and you just have no earthly idea. You do get this on, these are longer than Acts 1 and 2, and I think it fits. And again, it's a game. Your length varies depending on how you explore, but do keep that in mind. It is just fine to stop mid-chapter, mid-scene in an act and come back later. So it's not like you must sit in one sitting or you're not getting the full experience.
Absolutely.
So you can definitely make it's funny to be like, oh no, this 2-hour game didn't fit in my schedule, but you can bail when you need to, and the game will still be totally able to keep up
Absolutely.
with you.
So we've now talked for an hour and a half about the third act of a 5-act game. I think we've got to wrap it up here. So thank you, listeners, for sticking with us. I'm Reagan Kelly. You can find me on the internet at Reagan K. You can find our show on the internet at _shortgame or www.theshortgame.net, where you'll find our contact form to let us know what you're playing, as well as you can find us on Patreon, patreon.com/theshortgame. All of our listeners get access to our Discord, all of our patrons, supporters at any level get access to our Discord, which is where we talk about the game. And if you want to talk to me about pervasive global capitalism, finding its way into every aspect of your life, I would love to have that conversation with you on our Discord. You can also find us on all the podcast platforms, and we would love it if you'd leave us a review. Something like on the iTunes or Apple Podcast Store would be awesome if you have the time. And Laura, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Laura J. Nash.
And Shane, where can people find you?
Also on Twitter at 8BitShane.
And thank you for listening to The Short Game.